Three, two, one.
Welcome in Husker Extra Podcast, a morning edition. Not that you're going to listen to this in the morning, but it's 10:13 a.m. currently, Friday, July 2nd. The long weekend is nearly upon us. I'm Chris. There's Parker. Steven wrapping up vacation. He'll be back next week. So we'll have the gang all back together again next week. For now, though, you got to deal with us too for one more week. Hopefully that's okay. I'm looking a little jaundiced in my camera, so I apologize for that. I got some bad lighting.
You've got the July glow going.
I got the July glow going. I got about a 5-day beard going. So
you loaded up on NIL endorsements, and now you have all the bells and whistles in your home studio.
I'm pushing some Runza, and I'm pushing some whatever that other one was, Q Pop or whatever, something.
Go Puff.
Go Puff. Thank you. Yeah. That was a very old man thing I just said. A lot to talk about today. The last time we recorded a podcast, it was about, 18 hours before, or maybe a little less, a little more before we found out Bill Moos was retiring as athletic director at the University of Nebraska. So we're going to touch on that. We'll touch on some NIL, some football recruiting, a few other things, but it's been a busy week since the last time we talked. It started, of course, Friday morning with Parker's report that Bill Moos was out as Nebraska's athletic director. Yesterday, the financial terms of that departure, that separation were announced. Nearly $3 million going to Bill Moos, which makes you wonder just how much of a retirement this actually was. So it's been as always, no shortage of drama or interesting storylines surrounding the athletic department and the people who run it.
Yeah, it's funny. You said into the long weekend, and I was thinking, well, it's been a long week is what it's been. I mean, since the last time we potted, it's like the world changed about 3 times. And the first one, we'll talk about NIL and all that coming online. But with Moos, I mean, the thing, I mean, it felt sudden. It felt abrupt when it happened last week. And, he made it pretty clear in our conversation on Friday that obviously, we reported and had in the paper over the weekend that this was not fully his, he was going to retire at some point, obviously, but it happening effective June 30, 2021 was not what he had in mind. And he wouldn't tell us who, but he did say, well, I have regular monthly meetings with Ronnie Green, UNL's chancellor, and we have talked about the details of my contract and how long I might stay on. So I'm not a math major by any stretch, but you can put 2 and 2 together on that one and figure out that, clearly, Ronnie is Bill's boss and it probably wasn't only his decision, but he was involved in it. I think that's safe to say. And then the numbers come out yesterday, and Nebraska is paying Bill Moos his entire salary for the rest of his contract, 18 months worth of salary, plus $1 million of a $1.25 million deferred compensation payment that was due to Bill at the end of his contract, the end of 2022. And think about it this way, Baz. He was owed a prorated portion of that payment if he was fired. But if he voluntarily left the post, which a retirement would be, he was technically by his contract owed nothing of that.
Yeah.
And yet the university calls this a retirement, and they're paying him $1 million of the 1.25. I mean, it couldn't be more clear that this was a negotiated departure and it was instigated by the university. I mean, this is a retirement. This is what we call it for the politicos out there. This is a rhino. It's a retirement in name only.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's, it could just never be straightforward, can it? Like it can never be easy. There's always got to be something else to the story, whatever that may be, whatever went on behind the closed doors in the athletic department, whatever the relationships might have been. There's always more to it. Whether that stuff all comes out someday, maybe Bill Moos will write a book. I wouldn't totally put it past him to do something like that.
Wonder how long. I wonder if the NDA does that extend until death, or is it just for like a few years?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, that's a good question. The non-disclosure agreement. We shall. Bill Moos doesn't seem like a guy that is too terribly concerned with non-disclosure agreements, so maybe he won't worry about that. But yeah, there was clearly a lot going on there, and clearly enough going on that Ronnie Green and leadership felt this was the time. Whether that's fair to Bill Moos or not, or fair to anybody else or not, it is what it is. And so Nebraska's looking for an athletic director, and they're looking for an athletic director that's going to walk in at a pretty crazy time in the athletic department, like each of the last few athletic directors at Nebraska seem to have done. NIL, of course, Scott Frost has a huge year in front of him with that football team and that schedule. Fred Hoiberg has a pretty big year in front of him with what should be a much improved team. You just extended your baseball coach, Will Bolt, after a great year. There's a lot that's going to be on this new athletic director's plate, whoever it ends up being. And we should know that probably in the next few weeks, I would guess. Yeah. Ronnie Green said by the end of July at the latest. Yeah. So it's, I guess, if you're hiring for this position, Parker, or if you're Ronnie Green, what are you looking for maybe in the next person, man or woman, that's going to be stepping in here?
Well, ideally, there's a couple things that are always going to be big parts of the job for athletic directors, and the ability to make good coaching decisions is at the top of the list, honestly. Like at this point, that's the number one thing. Can you make the right decisions about not only about retention, or having to fire somebody, but then when you're invariably going to have to hire coaches. I mean, Bill Moos hired 12 in 3.5 years. And so, including the, 3 of the most prominent sports. Obviously, John Cook, has been in place for a long time, but then Frost, Hoiberg, and Will Bolt. So that's definitely one of them. I think, that to me, that there's been a couple among the last 3. I mean, obviously, Tom Osborne had the job for a while, and then Eichhorst just didn't work out. And then with Moos was definitely, I don't want to call him like a transition athletic director, but he was a little bit. I mean, they hired him when he was 66. He's 70 now. And so like, he was not probably going to be a 10 or 15 year athletic director. And I think it's fair to point out 10 to 15 year athletic directors are becoming a rare breed. I mean, yesterday there was 3 changes in the Big Ten West effective yesterday. We knew about all of them at various stages over the past couple of months, but Chris McIntosh formally took over for Barry Alvarez at Wisconsin beginning yesterday. Moos's was out officially yesterday, and I think the new Northwestern athletic director, who I'm blanking on his name, his first official day was yesterday too. So 3 out of 7 in the Big Ten West alone. It's become a job where it's hard to find long term. But I think if you're putting the wish list together, I think with all of the change and with the NIL stuff, that era beginning yesterday, all of the uncertainty coming out of the pandemic, like if you can find a woman or a man who can lead you for maybe, assuming they do a good job and all of that, like if you could find a long-term leader, a visionary type leader, sort of to usher in what seems like almost a new generation of college athletics. I mean, I think that's ideal. Is it absolutely necessary? I mean, if you don't get that, you're just setting yourself up for more change, and change, there's always going to be change. But I think, I wouldn't be surprised if they're looking at candidates across the spectrum, but somebody who could potentially be a long-term leader, I think would be the ideal situation.
There's no questions. Derek Gregg is the Northwestern athletic director, by the way. Yeah. He was announced June 4th. So, yeah, you're right. Like, you may not get a long-term person, but you need a long-term person. There's no doubt. There's just been so much instability in the athletic department, whether it's with coaches or leadership or whatever. And Bill Moos deserves a lot of credit for coming in and stabilizing things and being, you know, like you said, maybe a transitional athletic director, even though wasn't actually his title, but he hired the right coaches at the right time. He guided Nebraska through the pandemic. He basically set up, and whether this is a criticism or not, he set up a self-sufficient athletic department to where he wasn't there a whole lot,
Yeah.
you know, especially through the pandemic. Now, that's fine in some cases, but you know, you also need a leader there when a crisis arrives, and whether that's, you know, football coach resigning, whatever it may
Yeah.
be. I'm not
right.
But whatever it may be, you need a leader there, and you need a stable leader there, and you need somebody there who, when something like that arrives, you know, isn't going to be going anywhere. So, yeah, it's about stability for me too. And what does long term mean anymore? Who knows? You know, like you said, does that mean 10 to 15 years? Maybe not. Those are becoming a rare breed in college athletics. But if you find the right one and find the right fit, then it can become that. So, really, as always, fascinating to see how. I feel like we say that every week. This is going to be really interesting to watch play out, and it will be because it's never not interesting around here. But this is an important hire for Nebraska. Understatement of the year. This is a hugely important hire because there's a lot of hugely important things coming up that this new athletic director is going to have to deal with.
And so if we let's briefly sort of talk about where the search is at right now. It's been a week since Bill Moos was out. A lot of times, Baz, I mean, and it could be like, watch, but they could announce something today or right after the weekend. A lot of times, though, these things don't happen quite as quickly as coaching searches sometimes do. I mean, even when Sean Eichhorst was fired up, that was sort of a code red. You know, it was already 4 weeks into the football season, and you knew that the next athletic director was coming in to make a decision football wise. And even then, I think it was 3 or 4 weeks before Bill Moos, was introduced as the athletic director here, and 5 before he was actually in the chair. So, you know, this stuff doesn't happen overnight, especially, you know, it's a little bit of a different process when it's the university administration running the search compared to hiring a associate golf coach or something like that, you know? So we'll see how it goes. There's a couple people we know it won't be. It won't be Jamie Pollard from Iowa State, and it won't be Hank Bounds, the former system president. We reported that the other day. It seems, you know, you never say never in these things. This conversation about Ed Stewart, who's an executive in the Big 12 conference, seems to have really died down over the past couple of days. Again, you know, we haven't reported that he's 100% out of the mix or anything like that, but it just sort of seems that way. Yeah. So I don't know. It's going to be very interesting. There's definitely, you know, the rumor mill's sort of in full swing. You wonder about candidates that are closer to the program. You know, so the last two, Eichhorst and Bill Moos, were total outsiders. You know, I mean, Sean Eichhorst they both had sort of like tangential connections to, the state, I guess.
Bill Moos is
Alvarez to homesteading out in Western Nebraska in Bill's case, but they weren't connected to the university in any way really before they got here. And so there's a lot of people who think it's possible they'll go the other way with it this time. Now we'll see. You know, there's not much concrete. A lot of people ask, to use a simple phrase here, a lot of people ask about, you know, the potential candidacy of Trev Alberts at UNO. People ask about John Cook, who, by the way, has one of the best classes in volleyball history coming into his program this fall. So he's set up pretty well no matter what happens. And then there's always the possibility that it just, you know, the search firm finds somebody that they really like outside the walls. Garrett Classy's interim athletic director right now. He could be part of that conversation, or outside the walls. You know, there's hundreds of administrators out there around the country, and, you know, many of them are talented. Many of them are young and talented. So hard to say right now what's going to happen, or even exactly what the timeline looks like. But it's going to be, like you say, Baz, we say this every week, but it's going to be pretty interesting, I think, over the next few days to a couple weeks.
Yeah, you said the key word there, or key phrase, search firm. And I know this is like a thing that happens in all of these searches, but you would think if this was going to be an inside the walls hire, there probably wouldn't be a search for him getting hired. And maybe there's a smoke screen. I'm going to go into conspiracy theory territory here a little bit. But
where's your hat? Where's your hat?
Yeah, I need my tinfoil hat on. Yeah, but it's the phrase search term tells you that they probably are looking outside the family, so to speak, or outside the walls, however you want to say. You don't need to search for him to drive down to Omaha and talk to Trub Alberts. You probably don't need to search for him to get in touch with Ed Stewart. You certainly don't need one to talk to John Cook or Garrett Classy. So again, what does that mean? Who knows? We've seen search firms get hired before, and then it's somebody within an athletic department that gets hired after this search firm did a national search and settled on the guy that was right down the hall. So
search firms do this great. That search firms have this great service they provide where they give you this big old cover that you put right behind your butt.
Exactly. And it's worth every penny to those people.
It's worth every penny. That way you can say, look, yeah, well, I mean, we surveyed a lot of candidates around the country. It turns out the best guy was right down the hall or right down the road, or used to play here or whatever.
Yeah, it's funny. It's funny how often that happens, where the best guy's right under your nose, but you don't realize it until the search firm gets hired and is brought in and looks around for 2 or 3 weeks. So
we couldn't have known. We couldn't have known without.
We had no idea that this was available. Well, we'll move on from that. We could go on and on and on about Bill Moos and the search and everything, but there's only 24 hours in a day, so and there's a lot to talk about. So let's talk a little NIL. Another thing we could probably talk a while about. It became official at midnight last night, or I guess 2 nights ago, however your definition of midnight works. Midnight, July 1st, and we saw it right away. We said Garrett Classy, and he was one of the first tweets to say the new era is here. Let's go. And shortly after that, here came Lexi's son with a clothing line, and here came Casey Rogers promoting a canine dog training business. And
love it.
Here came Trey and Bryce McGowan's promoting their podcast, sponsored by a couple local bars. So we were off and running. I thought it was kind of cool to kind of watch it yesterday, because we didn't really know what to expect, right? Like, we didn't know if there was going to be just a fire hose of these things coming out, or what it was going to be. And it ended up not being that crazy. Lexi's son was kind of the big one with the clothing line, I thought, and the McGowan's brothers with the podcast. But other than that, I think it was a lot of pretty benign stuff. It was Runza. It was the delivery service. It was, the come play video games with us and pay us $10 or whatever it may. Omar Manning signing with a firm that's going to kind of vet his various opportunities. So it wasn't crazy. So, we might have some breaking news here. According to Twitter, let me see. Nebraska's Delano Banton is keeping his name in the NBA draft, he told ESPN. 6'9" point guard who led Nebraska in assists, rebounds, and blocks. Had a good showing at the G League Elite Camp in Chicago and subsequent pro day in front of quite a few NBA scouts.
Oh, there you go. Well,
there you go. Delano Banton going to stay in the NBA.
Our podcast is way too lo-fi to have a breaking news siren, but just imagine everybody listening that the breaking news siren is blaring.
Yeah. So you could kind of see this coming a little bit with Delano, if I may go off on a tangent here.
Tangent away.
It's a crazy story, because he wasn't even originally a part of the G League Elite Camp, and then there was an injury, and I forget the guy's name. He played at Houston, but there was an injury. Delano Banton got the invite, went up there, performed really well, led the camp in rebounds and blocks, or rebounds and assists, excuse me. Questions about how well he could shoot it, those sorts of things. And then went to some of these pro days and shot it really well, and kind of started rising up on draft boards and things like that. So it's a whale of a story for Delano Banton. He was one of the guys that was affected quite a bit by COVID last year. Got benched at the end of the season for a team that won 7 games, which tells you about how far off NBA radars he was. And now he's got a chance to be drafted. So it's a cool story for Delano. We'll see if he gets drafted or not, or if he signs it as an undrafted free agent. Maybe he's gotten a promise from a team that he's going to get picked in the second round.
That's what I was wondering, is if when this happens and you've just been working out in front of a bunch of NBA teams, does that mean that you have a pretty good idea that there's somebody who's going to take you in the second round.
Yeah, exactly. So we'll see. NBA draft. Oh, I forget the date of it, but it's coming up soon, of course.
Let's look.
Let's do
The
some
NBA
Googling. July 29th. July 29th. So 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 4 weeks from yesterday is when the NBA draft will be. So there you go. Delano Banton going to stay in the draft. Wild stuff.
Do you want to go right, Baz, or do you want? I can talk about NIL by myself if you want to go.
Yeah, right. I should probably go get a little writing done. So I'll sign off here. I'll talk to you guys next week, and I'll leave it here to.
Simple and I'll bring it home from here.
All right, thanks.
See you. Well, now it's just me, Parker Gabriel from the Journal-Star, with Baz off to write about the breaking news of Friday morning. Obviously, not quite on the level of the breaking news last Friday with Bill Moos leaving, but Delano Banton. That's what you get when you record a podcast and just run it up there live with whatever comes out of it. Sometimes you end up with a lone soldier remaining. So just briefly, with the NIL thing, one thing I think to keep an eye on with that is just there's going to be, it was interesting to see the trickle. And I think it's sort of, you can look at it a couple ways. I mean, Runza and GoPuff, there's very small amounts of money for each individual athlete that signed up on those things, but there's a novelty of it where, any of those kids that you saw with that yesterday, even if they got, if it was Henry Latovsky was tweeting about his candy order from GoPuff, it's still cool. You're going to look back on that and say, I made money on the first day of the NIL era. That's a pretty neat thing. Now, there's a couple sort of key people who I don't think we did see much from, in particular, Adrian Martinez, somebody like Cam Taylor-Britt. That those guys like that, other players on the volleyball team, athletes around the country have probably bigger deals in the works, but as we, contracts don't always come together that fast. So I think you're going to see some of the bigger dominoes on the NIL front fall over the next couple of weeks, maybe today, maybe over the next couple of weeks. But I think you'll see some of those bigger ticket items. There's been reporting out there on the national scene about, some of the most visible players in college athletics having big deals in the works, and those don't always come together right on the first day. So it's going to be fascinating. There's a rumor about somebody having a big deal with Delta Airlines or with some more national brands. So those are still coming for the most part, I think. And it's just going to be fascinating to watch it develop. Not to go too far into the weeds solo here, but one interesting thing, at Nebraska and most schools put out their own NIL policies yesterday for the schools. And the reason why all of these schools have individual policies, they probably would anyways, but the reason they're so critical now is because there's no NCAA policy really whatsoever. The NCAA threw up its hands and said, okay, schools, you got to figure this out, which long-term just is going to sow chaos probably. But the thing about Nebraska is that's interesting is last fall, when there was so many people involved in trying to set policy on the NIL front, one of the things that was at the core of that was keeping the schools and the athletes really separate in the deal-making process. And the thinking of that was, that then the only way that you can truly avoid limiting what athletes can pursue, which is the idea of the open market, is that they shouldn't be limited too much in terms of the sort of deals they could pursue, is to keep it separate from schools, because there'd be conflicts, right? The university has a lot of contracts in its own right. And the school of thinking several months ago was, well, if this is going to be an open market for athletes to be able to pursue endorsements, you can tell Lexi's son that she can't have an endorsement deal with a tobacco shop or a gambling service. That's a pretty clear line in terms of athletics and gambling and sports gambling and the way that relationship works. But you probably can't tell her that she can't have an endorsement deal with anybody who might compete with a university partner across the board. You're just taking too much of the market off the board. Well, without any NCAA guidance and without congressional legislation, sort of federally, it's gone the other way, where schools are saying, we'll help our athletes vet deals and make sure that they're not getting taken advantage of and all of that. And there's probably positives involved in that without a doubt. But they're also saying, and Nebraska included in this, among many, many others, like our athletes are not going to be signing deals that compete with university contracts, and so it's going to change a lot over the course of time. It's just a fact of the way it's unrolled here and come to be in existence, that there's going to be litigation at some point, not necessarily including Nebraska, just, in general, that's coming. And so, and who knows how long it'll take. Maybe it'll be right away. Maybe it'll be in a year or whatever. And we'll see if there's sort of more sweeping action at the congressional level at some point too. So it's kind of the Wild West right now. And just the way the relationship between athletes and schools in this NIL realm, I think, looks different at the outset than what you would have forecasted to look like 6 months ago. And that's because of the total lack of action taken by the NCAA. And the NCAA will say, well, Congress didn't do anything. Well, the NCAA still could have tried to put rules together, but didn't. And so this is sort of where it's at for now. So keep your head on a swivel, because it's going to change quite a bit over the course of time. And who knows? I mean, that could be matter of weeks, matter of months, matter of years. But I bet that in 2 or 3 years, when we look back on the opening days and weeks and months of the NIL era, it won't look somehow it will not look the same down the road as it looks right now. Last thing before we go, check the Journal Star this weekend. We got a story coming later today, sort of wrapping up what Nebraska accomplished football-wise on the recruiting trail in June. It's been a busy month. It's died down a little bit over the last 10 days or so. And then on top of that, with the athletic director news and the NIL news and all of that, it's maybe a little bit lost in the shuffle right now. But Nebraska added 7 players in the month of June, 5 for the 2022 class, which is sort of the core of the efforts right now. Obviously added Tyreek Johnson, for the 21 year as a transfer from Ohio State. And then landed Gunnar Gatula, the offensive lineman from Lincoln Southeast, for the 23 class. So it's been a busy month. There's more announcements on the way. Justin Williams, a running back from Georgia, is making his decision. Sounds like maybe Nebraska is climbing an uphill battle there. James Mons is announcing, the defensive back from Florida, is announcing on the 4th of July. That's a heated contest. There's a bunch of Big Ten schools involved there, probably primarily Nebraska, Wisconsin, and Indiana. Not quite. I mean, Nebraska's been in good shape all along with him, but that's going to probably go down to the wire. And then you never know. That there's several other guys that have visited now that could make their decisions over the next couple of weeks. So we'll have a rundown on all of that in the paper on Saturday, in print later today. Also have a story coming this weekend on Garrett Classy, who's the interim athletic director, just to look at sort of what brought him to this point, and a little bit more on, a potential candidacy. Mostly talked to other people about Garrett. He wasn't particularly interested in talking about his candidacy. You can understand that. He's sitting in the big seat on an interim basis for now. So those 2 things coming up this weekend, along with Baz got a really good story coming this weekend too. Obviously, Delano Banton news. We've got more on the NIL front and on the athletic director search. As always, it's the middle of the summer. Every college football coach in the country basically is on vacation, but that doesn't stop the train, man. There's a lot going on. So check Husker Extra. Can't even talk. It's so busy. Check huskerextra.com for all the latest. Please consider subscribing. You can do that at journalstar.com/subscribe. For the breaking news handler, Chris Basnet, and the vacationing Stephen M. Sipple, I'm Parker Gabriel. Thanks for listening. We'll talk to you next week.